Hi, year 11s and 12s. This is our fourth video in cell respiration PowerPoint. This is a HL topic in metabolism, cell respiration and photosynthesis. In this one, we're looking at the last stage of cell aerobic respiration, which is the electron transport chain. As I've said in all the other videos, there is no need to know in this video. If you need to look at the need to know, that is physically stored on the PowerPoints that are on the OneDrive. So let's begin. With the electron transport chain, there's 3 or 4 steps that we're going to look at, each on their own slide, so we can talk about exactly what's happening in the electron transport chain. Before we start with those steps though, let's talk about a little bit what the electron transport chain is. So the electron transport chain is the final stage of aerobic respiration. The electron transport chain is located on the inner mitochondrial membrane. And the entire purpose of the electron transport chain is to release the energy stored within the reduced hydrogen carriers, which we made in the Krebs cycle, in order to synthesize ATP. Now we call this oxidative phosphorylation because the energy that we use to create ATP is derived or comes from the oxidation of hydrogen carriers. So let's look at how the electron transport chain actually works. So the very first step is to generate a proton motive force. So we're using our hydrogen carriers, which are NADH and FADH2. We oxidize these, and that releases high energy electrons and protons. These electrons are transferred to the electron transport chain through several transmembrane carrier proteins. As they pass through the chain, the electrons lose their energy, which is then used by the chain itself to pump protons or hydrogen ions across the matrix. This accumulates hydrogen ions in the intermembrane space between the inner and outer membranes of the mitochondria and creates an electrochemical gradient, or otherwise known as a proton motive force. Okay. We then move to step 2, where we create ATP synthesis through CHEMIOSMOSIS. Okay. We start with the proton motive force has caused the hydrogen ions to move down their electrochemical gradient and diffuse back into the matrix of the mitochondria. The diffusion of these protons is called chemiosmosis and is facilitated by the transmembrane enzyme ATP synthase. As those hydrogen ions move through the ATP synthase, they trigger molecular rotation of the enzyme, which generates ATP. So it's basically spinning, creating ATP. We then move on to step 3, which is the reduction of oxygen. So in order for the electron transport chain to continue to function and not just stop after it's done this, those de-energized electrons have to be removed from the electron transport chain. So oxygen basically is being used as our last electron acceptor. It removes all the de-energized electrons to prevent that chain from being blocked. It will also bind with the free protons in the form of hydrogen ions to form water, and that will maintain the hydrogen gradient. In the absence of oxygen, the hydrogen carriers can't physically transfer energized electrons to the chain, and ATP production would be stopped, so we can't physically continue on with aerobic respiration. We're just going to watch a little bit of a video here to show how this process works. So we start with our first step. First off, we've got our electron transport chain here, and our ATP synthase here, and you can see the zoom up here. Our hydrogen carriers, NADH and FADH2, come in, they release their high energy electrons through oxidation, and they will use those electrons, the transport chain will use those electrons to move hydrogen ions out of the matrix into the intracellular matrix between the two membranes. Okay. In step 3, those ions return to the matrix through ATP synthase. As they move through, they create, so you can see it here, as it moves through, it causes the ATP synthase to spin, which generates ATP through chemiosmosis. Finally, we get to step 4, which is going to pop up in a second. We're just going to watch all the hydrogen ions move. Step 4, oxygen ions come through. They accept the de-energized electrons and the hydrogen ions. They become water, and the cycle can then continue to move on.